Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of It Ain't Weak to Speak. My name is Sam Webb, and this show is dedicated to ending the stigma around mental health through community, connection, and the hard-hitting truth. I'll be speaking with guests from all over the world about life to inspire and to educate people to speak up so that we can save more lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Welcome, Dom. How are you, mate, from New York City? Talk to me. What is happening?
Sammy, good to see you, brother. I think the last time we were together was in Santa Monica at the Equinox. We might have been crushing some box jumps.
Mate, my little pins were so sore that next day, probably for about 2 or 3 days. But, mate, always a good time catching up with you. And Same, it was out here in the better part of America on the West Coast.
Better part is debatable, man. I'm here in New York City, and I think we got it on lock here, but we can have that debate.
We certainly can, man. We can. But how's things, mate? What's been happening?
A lot of stuff's been happening, man. Finished writing my second book manuscript. That one is in review right now, and that one's a book for leadership. It's called On Purpose Leadership. Master the art of leading yourself so you can impact and influence others. That's exciting. And I just launched my very first men's mastermind called the Great Man Mastermind, where I'm supporting men who are stepping up and becoming the greatest version of themselves and finding their purpose, living in accordance with that, and creating environments where they and others can thrive.
Yeah, that's unreal, man. I remember, obviously, each time that we catch up, and the most recent time in Santa Monica at Equinox, we spoke deeply about this. I was reaching out for you for a little bit of advice about the impact that maybe I could have on, my audience and whatnot in and around the sort of work that you might be touching on. But I was very fascinated about the work that you're doing and how it all began. And, obviously me being me, I ask thousands of questions. I'm like a little curious kid. But to share with the audience a little bit, where did this all start for you, mate? Like, I know, and no one who's listening probably knows that your background was in the financial markets in New York City. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, man. I spent 15 years coming straight out of college in 2001, 15 years in financial services. I worked for a Fortune 100 company called Prudential Financial, and I was involved in some pretty pressure-filled sales environments. I was a sales leader. And for example, my sales team had a $1.4 billion sales goal that reset every single year. So it was intense stuff, great career, was never in love with it. And I think maybe there's probably a fair amount of your listeners who are working in environments where they're not in love with them, but they got on that path somehow. And I can certainly share part of my story about how I just kind of followed this default path to a place where there was a lot of comfort and security, and in many cases, like some great experiences, but just wasn't feeling lit up by my life, and how that came crashing down at certain points in time where I really I felt like I had to pick up the pieces and didn't know how.
Okay. And before we get to the place where things started crashing down, you didn't really know how to pick up the pieces and how did you get stuck? Obviously, are we talking about being financially secure? You were making good money. You were just in the rat race of life and you didn't really know anything better. Is that what we're talking about here? Or is it that you were too scared to jump out and try something new at the time?
Yeah, man. I mean, so I just followed this path, right? Like when I was a kid, I went to school, and then I knew I was going to go to high school, and then I knew I was going to go to college. And when I graduated college, I knew I was going to get a job that provided me security. And as a man, what I was told that made me a man was getting a job where I could accelerate quickly at a company that was recognizable, that made good money, and that had upward mobility. And that was it. And it was like, okay, well, if I can do that, then I'm a man and I can be successful. I'm a competitive dude. I played sports all throughout, like my childhood, baseball, football. And so I just followed the path, and I never really questioned, like, what is it that I really enjoy? What lights me up? Those were questions that didn't even enter my mind. I just followed the path. And when I was 30 years old, I was a VP of sales at Prudential, and I was the youngest person doing the job by about like 15 years or so. So like I took a particular pride in that. And that year I was the number one sales guy This was 2009. I tripled my sales goal that year. And 2009, if anyone remembers, was the Great Recession. Like the world was collapsing at that time. And I just happened to be working on a number of deals. These were big, complex deals that took like 12 to 18 months like for them to close. And they happened to close and transition in 2009. So my year, I was having the best year of my life financially,
Wow.
career-wise, when the rest of the world was falling apart. And when January and February started rolling into that year, like my year was done and everyone else was freaked out. And I remember thinking, I thought I would feel a lot better about this. I thought that I would feel accomplished. I feel like, all of the things I've been working for, I got earlier than I thought they would. And I'm not feeling this inner fulfillment. And I was like, if I have to do this for another 30, 40 years
Mm.
and it doesn't feel that good right now, that scares the hell out of me. And so I started asking, like, I didn't know what to do with myself because I knew I wasn't going to have years like that every year. And I wasn't feeling that great about it. And it was the first time that I really woke up from my slumber of 30 years of my life of just following some default path. And I started to ask deeper questions about what do I want to do here? And what's my path forward? Because this isn't going to cut it for me.
Very powerful, mate. Like, I mean, you sit here and you can say that story so easily, like, because I know so many people would be able to resonate with that, especially our audience,
Yeah.
especially my audience here. And I think so many people are on a path that they don't know how to get off, and they don't ever have that wake up moment because they don't know how. And I think it's something that I deal with on a daily basis, especially with friends and family and other people in my life. And
You know,
what was it you were looking for? You said that you had achieved such an amazing year. Everything else was crashing down and you didn't feel fulfilled. Like, this isn't the first time I'm hearing this from one person. I hear this quite often. But what
yeah.
was it that you were expecting to happen after you had this amazing experience and you were crushing it, making great money, no doubt, in New York City, living your best life at 30 years of age, great job and everything else? What was it you were actually hoping to achieve?
See, dude, that's like the $1 million question that I wish someone would have asked me and really held my feet to the fire. Because if someone had asked me that, or if I'd asked myself that, and I really thought about it, I don't know if I would have had an answer for you. I think in some unconscious corner of my mind, I just believed that if I had this money, if I had this title, if I had this status, if I had this place in New York City, then I would then all of these fears or like this unconscious anxiety that I feel on a regular basis that fuels me day to day, that all of that would eventually go away, and I'd be happy. And
Mm.
I think that and without actually ever really sitting into that, I didn't know what I was chasing. And so when I got there, I was disappointed. And Sam, I think this is something that this is something I want to share with your listeners, because this is a phenomenon that almost everybody experiences. And it's this phenomenon called drift. Do you have like 2 minutes for me to go on a side about what drift is?
Definitely, man. Please, I'd love you to share your wisdom. It's very valuable.
This will blow your mind. So Napoleon Hill is an author of the book called Think and Grow Rich. And there's only been 15 books that have ever sold over 50 million copies worldwide. And I'm talking about non-religious texts, right? Only 15 books that have ever sold over 50 million copies. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill is one of them. And Napoleon Hill was the one who coined this term drifting. And there's a bit of a backstory to it. So he did his best work during the Great Depression era, right? In the 20s and the 30s. And he had a mentor by the name of Andrew Carnegie of Carnegie Steel, the
Mhm.
billionaire right? And Carnegie said to Napoleon, if you want to understand how the most successful people in the world became successful, go out and interview all of them, 500 of them, mine their secrets, write the book. So Napoleon Hill went out and he interviewed Henry Ford, the Roosevelts, the Rockefellers, J.P. Morgan, Charles Schwab, Wrigley. He mined their secrets, wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, which became this Bible for how to attract abundance and riches into your life. For any of your listeners, and by the way, to learn how to control the thoughts in your mind that take you away from fear and towards creation, empowerment, right? So get that book. But Carnegie gave him a secondary piece of advice that I found to be even more powerful. He said, if you want to understand the true human experience, not just the most successful people, the true human experience, then go out and interview 10 times as many of those people who are at the end of their lives, who feel like they left chips on the table, who feel like they lived a life of regret, they didn't live their fullest potential. Talk to them and find out how they ended up there and write that book. So Napoleon Hill took 25 years and he interviewed 25,000 people at the end of their lives who felt like they didn't live their fullest potential. He mined their secrets and he wrote a book called Outwitting the Devil, which is the number one most important book of my life. And the devil is a distillation of these 25,000 dreams that were lost. And I remember reading this book when I was here in New York City. It was during Hurricane Sandy, where we had a complete total blackout. No power, no Wi-Fi, no running water. I had a flashlight and a book. And so like these words that I'm about to share with you, like they came inside my soul and they shifted me forever. The devil says, the way that I make my way into the minds of people is through habit, through their habits. And through habit, I established this principle of drifting. And when I can get a person to drift, I can lead them straight towards the gates of hell. And what the devil is saying is that we think we're in conscious command of our day-to-day existence. We think that we are making choices consciously every single day. We think we're behind the driver's wheel of our own car, when in actuality, we're sitting in the back seat, or sometimes we're stuffed in the trunk, while it's our habits, our patterns, our fears, our belief systems, what society tells us, our pressure from our parents, what your boyfriend tells you should do, what your girlfriend tells you should do. That's what's driving our car unconsciously. And it's only when an outside force thrusts itself upon us do we wake up from the state of drift. And usually it's something pretty crappy, like the coronavirus, like an unexpected illness or the loss of a loved one, or an emotional breakdown, a mental breakdown, losing your job. And these moments can be beautiful wake-up calls, right? Like I imagine you, Sam, and I know you, and I imagine many of your listeners have had experiences where when they were going through some torment in the past, they now look at it and they say, that's the thing that made me the man or the woman I am today. I would never change that. Even though when you're going through it, it was torture. But my question to you then is, if the only thing that is creating meaningful change in your life are outside forces thrusting themselves upon you, then how in command of your life are you really? You need to learn, and I needed to learn, and I still continue to need to learn how to break free from this insidious evil, which is drift. That takes us into our patterns and our habits unconsciously.
Mate, that is so powerful. And it's wow. You articulated that amazingly, Dom, and I commend you on that. And two very good books I'm probably going to go pick up. And I do remember fondly you and I in New York City going to the bookshop when I was with you there last, and that was a year or two ago. So on that topic though, when you say people are unconsciously driving their car, thinking they're in full control of it, how do we make people more aware that they aren't in fact in control of their daily habits and emotions and feelings and relationships in life, and not wait for these traumatic experiences or what you call a wake-up moment to occur in their life so that they can stop drifting and wake up and start living? How do we unlock that and be proactive rather than reactive? Because so many people, I was one of them, and I've brought this up on a podcast before, is, for me, my life was spiraling out of control. And I knew that it wasn't going in the right direction. I was actually very self-aware that I was making bad choices and things weren't working out and things weren't getting any better. And it took a very, very dark moment in my life for me to realize that I had to wake up and make a change. Otherwise, I possibly could have been dead myself. You know what I mean? So how can we teach people the art of not drifting and being more in control of their life without having to wait for something so bad to happen?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, Sam. So the first place I'll start with when answering that is understanding why drift is so pervasive, right? So some neuroscientists, neuroscience has shown that about 95%, maybe even more, of our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors fall below our conscious detection. 95%, which means that only 5% of what we think and feel and do is actually consciously detected. And a big part of the reason for this is because our brain, it's like 2% of our body weight, but it takes about 20 to 25% of our body's energy, our body's electricity, which means that we need to develop shortcuts for us to operate effectively. And shortcuts come in the form of habits and patterns that become unconscious. When you first started to learn how to drive, it was like difficult to remember how to accelerate and put your turn signal on. You had to remember all of these different things. You don't even think about it now. It's in your unconscious. You've developed shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, like you can develop some pretty bad habits in those patterns in your habits. That's where fears are born. Maybe when you were a kid, you raised your hand in class, got the wrong answer once, and you decided, I'm never going to speak up ever again,
Mm.
right? Or you got hurt or rejected in an early relationship. Your heart was broken. And so now you go and sleep with a bunch of women and you reject them before they can reject you. And this is unconscious. Like men can play that out over the course of an entire lifetime, or women whose hearts have been broken can say that no guy is trustworthy, and then never fully enters a relationship or looks for any sign of weakness and instability and pounces on that. And that stuff can run in our operating systems for an entire lifetime until we do what you just said, Sam, which is like, how do we create these intentional awakenings in our lives? So I actually ended up writing a book about this called Design Your Future. And it's called 3 Steps to Stop Drifting and Take Command of Your Life. Because drift is like, I believe, the biggest challenge that I face and that a lot of the people I speak to face.
I
And I'll
definitely
just
face. Yeah, totally.
we all do, because we're engineered that way, right? I mean,
Mm.
our habits and our patterns are, we wouldn't be able to get along without them. Like if you were to walk into a grocery store and you didn't have like a shortcut in your mind to be like, oh, okay, like I know what things I need to get, and this is how a grocery store is laid out. If you had to constantly reorient yourself every single day to, where am I? What do I need to do? You would never get anywhere. So there's a beauty in that, but also these feelings that we have, maybe the mental obstacles or the negative voice in our head. It's because like there's drift that's taken over. And if we can learn how to disrupt ourselves, and I'll share part of my story in a little bit,
Yeah, I'd
but
love to
like
hear.
I had a lifelong series of compulsive behaviors that ended up coming to a crashing halt that caused me to enter a period of addiction recovery for 4 years. So I know what it's like to drift and to drift deep and to be like led astray. So that's why I'm so passionate about talking about this. So the 3 steps that I propose in the book, and I have a couple of podcasts on this too, if people want to dive deeper. It's called The Great Man Within Podcast. And an episode's called The Number One Enemy to Living a Powerful Life. I go deep on this. The 3 steps are awaken, disrupt, design. So for you to first stop the drifting, you need to create intentional awakenings. And I distinguish awakenings from awareness in the sense that the distinction between awareness and awakening is you are ready to actually take action. Smokers may be aware that smoking is harming them, but they don't necessarily aren't ready to stop, right? Some people are just like, this provides me a way to calm
Release.
down.
Yeah, release,
Yeah,
or
anything,
it's my
right?
outlet.
An awakening is where something shifts. It's like, I'm no longer willing for this to happen. And so in order, like mechanisms to create intentional awakenings are meditation, slowing your life down, right? Creating space between stimulus and response where you can sit and you can actually allow up some of these thoughts, some of these feelings. Journaling is a fantastic way. And I'm actually not a big fan of written journaling. Some people are. I actually love my audio journaling. I just put my headphones on, put the voice memo on my iPhone, and I just rip. I just talk until
Wow.
stuff comes out. And what that does is it starts to surface some of these unconscious fears that I have or patterns of behavior that are causing me problems. And I started to recognize, Sam, that, wow, I notice that when I'm stressed out, I start binge watching Netflix, 2 or 3 episodes. And 1 episode's great for restoring. 2 or 3 tips me into a point of escaping and numbing. Wow, I don't think that's helping me.
Mm.
Now I'm ready to change that. So I moved to step number 2, which is disrupting. And disrupting means taking this what pattern that's limiting you and creating like these experiments around changing that behavior. In the example of Netflix, I create these temporary abstinence periods. It's like, you know what? I'm going to take 10 days off. I'm not going to watch any TV, no Netflix. I'm not going to watch any YouTube either, because I find that I disappear into that. And through this 10-day experiment, I can actually start to recognize why I disappear in the first place. That gives me extraordinary information as to why I have that habit or that pattern in the first place. Is that making sense?
Yes, definitely.
So now I do the 10-day experiment. That's disrupting my pattern. Now I recognize, wow, now it's 7 p.m. at night, and all I want to do is dive onto my couch and watch Netflix and disappear. Now I'm contending with the discomfort of that. Then I get to write about it. Now I have deep insight into that, like why I had that behavior. Now I can actually pick up a book instead and read something. That actually makes me feel restored. Maybe I can get an extra hour of sleep. Holy cow, like things are shifting now. So this third step after awakening and disrupting is what I call designing. Now I have a whole series of I have a list of information and awareness about why I had that habit and pattern to begin with. So now I get to design my new relationship with TV and Netflix, or alcohol, or food, or sexting, or porn, whatever your poison is, right? And it's like, I will allow myself to watch one episode of whatever show I'm watching, because 30 to 60 minutes is restorative for me. But once I hit the play the next episode, I'm now in numbing and escaping territory. And so now I've designed a healthy new relationship with this thing before where I was drifting.
Yeah, right. And so a big part of this sounds like, with the 3 stages of awakening, disrupting, and designing, is obviously you need to be self-aware. You certainly need to be super in control of your awareness, I feel. Is that something you can teach someone, or is it something that you've got to practice often? Is it something that you do through gratitude? Is it something you do through journaling, or just a whole range of different self-care and self-coping strategies?
Yeah, good stuff, man. So definitely meditation slows the game down, creating space in your life if you're a really busy person, and just giving yourself like 10 or 15 minutes to journal or to reflect. And instead of doing this all on your own, because those are 2 practices that I gave you that are on your own, reaching out to your community, to your support, right? And if you don't have someone who's an immediate friend, well, first of all, if you do have someone you could reach out to, like Sam, I would reach out to you and I'd be like, hey brother, I'm really struggling right now. I find myself just like anxious and nervous. Here's what's going on in my life. Can you reflect back to me maybe how I'm showing up right now?
Yeah.
Or like, what are some of the things that you see me doing that may be limiting me? And then
it's
you can
really
give me that, well, because sometimes we can't see ourselves.
Yeah, and it's really, sometimes it's a lot easier to be on the outside and see the habits and the patterns that your friend or your spouse or your loved one is actually currently going through. So would you recommend someone speaking to their partner or their loved one, or as well, or is it always someone externally?
It could be
I'm just talking for the listeners out there that who have a very fulfilled relationship. Is it something that you'd advocate for them to share with their partners?
100%. And if you have that, if you have that relationship with your partner where it's like, hey, I want to show up better for you. Actually, every relationship I imagine would want to be this way. It's like, I'd love to show up better for you. And the best way to do that is making sure I'm showing up for me. Here's how I'm feeling. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that you see that maybe I don't, that like is standing in my way? And allow them, and don't be defensive, because you may hear some stuff that you don't like, or they're that you may have to take a break from things that are uncomfortable for you. And for those of you who don't have that, like I don't have a partner right now, or maybe you're even finding it challenging to find a friend, there are plenty of online forums that if you just did a search, maybe a Facebook group, maybe even like your podcast community, right? Like you have, what's your Facebook group called?
It Ain't Weak to Speak with Sam Webb Facebook community group. So people can join that following all these episodes and stay connected with the conversation and learn more about what you're up to, Dom, what we've been up to and where we're going from here. And connect with our guests and our audience members and listeners from all over the globe.
That'd be a perfect place to just say, hey, I heard this, I'm feeling this.
Yep.
And, can anyone support me? What are your ideas? So to get out from Yeah, behind like the closed walls of your own
And I
system.
believe a big part of it, like you said, is communication. I mean, it's very important. And, a big part of this podcast is dedicated to the fact of speaking out, because it ain't weak to speak, but that's in all walks of life. It's not just about mental health challenges. It's everything. I speak to my partner, Nadia, a lot about, the challenges that I face time to time, and how can I show up better? Is there everything that I'm doing correct? Is there something that I'm not doing right? I don't have the answers for everything. And I think a really important takeaway from that is you've got to learn to be able to shift and to make a change and not be set and stuck in your own ways, because that can be very dangerous as well.
You know what? And as you're saying that, which is spot on, if you're feeling particularly vulnerable, like you're maybe afraid of having someone else turn the spigot on and unloading a whole bunch of stuff that you're not ready to take, then you can always frame it in a way where it's like, listen, I am feeling pretty raw right now, and I'm coming to you for help. If there's one thing you can give me, like, you have control over setting the frame and the container so that, they understand that maybe one thing is all you can handle right now. So be gentle on yourself, be careful, or not careful, but just
Be
be mindful
kind.
of how
Be
you
kind.
kind. That's the word I was like, be kind to yourself and how you're seeking this so that you can receive the support you're looking for without being overwhelmed or feeling beaten down by it.
And in like a non-judgmental way as well, I think is really important, because the last thing that someone wants to do is to be able to open up and share or ask some feedback and see if they're on the right path, or if there's something that they're doing wrong. And then turns out that they're getting shut down. And then they might, like you said, we're all built by our past experiences. And if that's the case, like asking a question when we're young, I'm not going to ask any more questions again because I got the wrong answer. You know what I mean? So it's about
Mhm.
nurturing that, because I think that's really important too. And having an open mind, that everyone's on their own journey. And I think it's really important to listen, and to listen non-judgmentally. But Dom, I want to talk to you, mate, about this drifting, because I find the three stages, the work that you've done within your book, the work that you're doing now within your community, especially in the men's community, and your mastermind and all that great stuff in between, which we'll touch on shortly. Talk to me about your life and your awakening, and how far your life drifted to a point where, shit, I need to get back on track. Otherwise, I have no idea where my life's heading and what I'm going to be
Yeah.
capable of doing. I'm very intrigued.
Very cool, man. I just got to tell you, you've been working on your American R's. You're saying them beautifully, dude. So you've made so much progress since we started.
Thanks, brother. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, see, listen to that, man. Okay, cool. So to give you some perspective on how far I drifted in my public life, like the public facing Dominick, I was the guy who had a corner office in Times Square who overlooked where the ball dropped. I was
Wow.
the guy who oversaw a team with a $1.4 billion sales goal, working for a Fortune 100 company where there was a lot of opportunity in front of me. And I prided myself on being a strong leader and someone who was trustworthy and had integrity. And all of those things in my life were true, except there was this one area of my private life that I hid from the world that came crashing down on me, and not just me, but on someone who I really cared about and I loved, on December 28th of 2012. And on December 28th of 2012, my girlfriend and I, at the time, the only woman in my life who I'd ever allowed deeply enough into my heart where I could actually say I felt love for someone, for a woman in a romantic relationship. I actually wondered for a big part of my life if I was capable of loving someone, because I'd never felt this feeling that everyone sings songs about or writes movies about. She got there. And on December 28th of 2012, we took our very first trip to Colorado together. We were going to spend the new year in skiing. We checked into the St. Julian Hotel in Boulder, Colorado. I went to go take a shower. I came out. She was holding my cell phone and she was pale in the face. She threw it at me and ran out the door. And I looked at where where she'd explored in my phone, and it was on a string of text messages with another woman that were as heartbreaking as anyone could ever not hope to find. What had happened was, I had probably about 10 or 12 other women in my phone who I'd had intense sexual conversations with, and I'd cheated on my girlfriend on 3 separate occasions. And this private world of me came crashing down. And before I talk about the story of, what happened with her and I, let's rewind back to when I was a really young kid. I'm 41 years old right now. I got to give you that context, because the first time I discovered anything really sexual was when I was 6 years old, went into my parents' basement where all the boxes are buried, right? Like all the bodies are buried, and rummaging through the cardboard boxes when I found a buried treasure, and it came in the form of a Playboy magazine. So I'm like 6, 7-year-old boy, right? And the centerfold pops out and I see a naked woman for the first time, and my whole body just stopped. I'd never felt the feelings that I'd felt before in my life. Like, it was my first memory of sexual feelings. And that washed over me intensely for a short period of time before I quickly woke up from that. And I said, this is wrong. Because I grew up in a house where sex and sexuality, my parents are amazing. They're extraordinary human beings, but sex and sexuality was something not to be discussed. It was wrong. Like when we were watching a movie on TV and there would be like a kissing scene, my parents would lunge across the couch and be like, no, and they'd cover my eyes so I didn't see it. You know what I mean? And then like the tension in the room was it was miserable, because they were just like, that shouldn't have happened. For the next 10 minutes, it was just like I could feel a knot in my stomach because of how upset they were. And so I learned unconsciously that this feeling I had to want to see that kiss on screen was not welcome. It was actually bad. It was wrong. And I also went to 7 years of Catholic school, kindergarten through 6th grade, where I also learned that that kind of stuff was punishable by going to hell for a lifetime. That was how I learned it. Not necessarily how everyone in Christianity or Catholicism is brought up, but how I learned it. And I had these intense feelings, just like any other growing child would, as they're discovering their sexuality. But I learned very early on, not okay. So private Dominick learned to keep these feelings aside. Public Dominick was the guy that everyone said, good boy, well-behaved, good athlete, good student, like do that. And I got praised, and I built all of my sense of self-worth on the external validation. So I just learned how to play that game, play that role. But behind the scenes, man, especially as I became like a teenager and I started discovering porn and masturbation, these feelings that I had could help me to escape from like being a kid at school who was anxious, who was nervous, who was angry, who felt alone and isolated when I moved from Catholic school to public school. I learned how to self-stimulate through masturbation, and that brought all of my pain away. I would like 4 or 5 times a day just to like get the pain away from me. It was a chronic issue for me. So I had these 2 lives, the public and private Dominick, what the world wanted to see and what I thought the world loved. And this part of me that I thought was revolting and disgusting that no one would love if they actually saw that part of me. But it was the thing that I used to like deal with any overwhelm, with feeling alone, feeling anxious, feeling isolated. And I had 2 decades worth of that behavior, and I just drifted. It became so normal, Sam. It was just like a part of my life that, when I would come home after a long day of work, frustration, and I just wouldn't even think about it. Computer, porn, jack off. Or come home, I'm feeling alone. I'm going to sit on my couch. I'm going to send 10 text messages out and see who wants to engage with me. And then we'll go down that path, and then, okay, cool, go to sleep. And it just went on and on and on until I finally found, and I never thought I was capable of ever harming someone, ever betraying someone. But it was a series of behaviors that just built on itself. Every promise I made to myself of, tonight I'm not going to watch porn, I would break it. Or I ended up in this relationship. Well, I'm going to stop when we say I love each other. And then when we started saying I love each other, I stopped sexting other women for a few weeks. And then I broke my promise to myself, broke my promise to her. It was the one area of my life where I just couldn't keep a promise for myself. And I'm a disciplined dude every other area of my life. And then eventually I broke her heart when she discovered this. And that was where my public and private worlds collapsed for the first time. And I just became one Dominick. And and that's when I went into a period of 4 years of Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery, initially to try and save the relationship. It was my lifeline to save her because I loved her. But as I ended up in the program for about 2 or 3 months in, I started to recognize this is not about saving the relationship. This is about saving me. And I had no idea, Sam, how deep some of those behaviors ran. I had no idea how dysfunctional I was because on the surface, I looked like a model of togetherness.
Mm.
I had no idea how disconnected from my feelings I was. And these past, I mean, it's been 7 years, right, since that period of time where I've done an intense amount of inner work, made amends, humbly accepted where my shortcomings are and my failings are. And then, now I'm leading other men through those inner journeys where they can start to awaken to where they're holding themselves back, disrupt themselves, and design new ways of being so that they don't hurt themselves and they don't damage the relationships in their lives that matter most to them.
Mate, thank you very much for sharing that. It's the first time I've heard that on that deeper level. So I'm very, very grateful to have heard that as a firsthand experience right now with all the listeners. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I think that it's definitely something that so many dudes would be able to relate with on so many different levels. Yeah, but very, and you said you've undertaken about 7 years of inner work to get to a place today where you're leading other men.
Yeah.
But back when you're in the funk and you were drifting hard and bad, and then the missus found out and all that sort of stuff, what was going through your mind? Can you take us back through what was going through your mind? How you were justifying that was acceptable? What was like? Where was the cutoff line? Like, what was going through your head? I want to explore that area a little bit. Knowing that you've done this, and in the moment, like anyone who's got a problem, whether it's anxiety or whether it's drug addiction or whatever it is, there's always a way that there's a way to justify it. Like I've justified my actions in my past. I've done that. So it's something that's really bad, you can justify there's a reason why I did it.
It's so true, man. And this is why it's so critical to have community, because when you are the judge, the jury, the police, and you're overseeing your own BS, then you're guaranteed to fail. Like over the course of time, you're guaranteed to drift into territories that you just never thought yourself possible. And it happens slowly, Sam. You talk about these rationalizations and justifications. It's basically first of all, here's an awareness moment. If you find yourself making promises to yourself that you constantly break, then you're drifting and you need help. And when I say help, I'm not saying that you need to go get therapy. It could be an answer for you. It could just be you need to stop doing this on your own and ask a brother or ask a sister to help you out in this regard. Because I know for men specifically, we try to solve everything on our own.
Mm-hmm.
They'll listen to this podcast and be like, I'm good, dude. Or I'll read a book. I'm good, dude. And they'll try and figure out everything on their own.
Problem solvers, always trying to problem solve.
Yes. And also because our masculinity has almost hinged upon not showing any weakness. Right? We've been socialized to, and this firsthand, man, from all the work that you do. What makes a man is a guy who's a rugged individual. He doesn't need to ask for directions. He doesn't need to ask for help because that is a shot at your manhood. That's old bullshit. That's antiquated, right? The real man knows where his limitations are. The real man knows who he can go to trust to say, I'm a danger to myself and to others if I don't get this thing fixed. So help me out here. So if you're aware of where you're making promises to yourself and you're breaking them regularly, then that's a sign that you need to step up and get some support. Now, how did I rationalize these things? It was basically it started so small, Sam. It was kind of I don't know if we're really exclusive or dating yet, and until we have the conversation where we're exclusive, I'm going to still keep sleeping with other women. So I did that. I'm going to do it as long as I can until we have that conversation, totally ignoring the energy of the relationship, right? I shouldn't need a defined conversation to know, hey, we're moving towards something pretty special here, right? But I just allowed myself to kind of say, until we have the conversation, even though internally I felt a tug that maybe there was something wrong. And then when it became official, it was kind of like, you know, sexting is not that much different than watching porn. So I'm not really acting on it. I'm not physically cheating on her. So I'm just going to continue sexting if like she's not available to engage with me or to have sex with me. So then I would just continue some of those conversations, even though I felt a tug that maybe that was something that was wrong or out of alignment with how I wanted to be. And then it was kind of like, well, if then I started listening to how every other guy is saying it's not in our chemistry or in our DNA to want to be monogamous. And so I started reading all that bullshit. And for some people that may be true, but I started reading that not necessarily to expand my perspective. I was reading it so that I could justify stepping out and being like, I'm going to resent her if I don't do this, And like, it was just these series of stupid, when I look back on it, behaviors that I allowed myself to keep adding on top of. And it was one minor thing after another. A quick aside, Sam, there's this crazy social experiment that highlights what I'm talking about here, about how these small rationalizations can turn into something unthinkable. There is a magician named Darren Brown. He has a special on Netflix called The Push. It's like a 60 or 90 minute show. It's a social experiment where he basically gets people to break their integrity to themselves so small over a short period of time that they're confronted at the end of 90 minutes with the idea of potentially pushing another human being off the top of a building and killing them. And without ruining the ending for you, I'll just say that you will be shocked all the way throughout the episode and the ending of how you can take a fully functioning human being and get them in such a short period of time to break their integrity and ratchet that up because of it's just these small moves over time. So that's drifting
and they add
condensed
up
in a 90-minute, and I would encourage you to watch that, because then it'll help you to feel a little bit better about how some of your behaviors that you didn't think you were capable of, how we're all capable of that and give yourself a break.
Yeah, mate. Thank you for sharing. I'll have to check that out for sure, because I won't be going too far at the moment. So Netflix is probably a good option. But mate, that being said, and I'm very grateful that you're able to share that with all of us right now, and very grateful to again have you on the show today, Dom. It's always a pleasure. I know you and I met when you were on your transformation journey. We met over in Aroha at one of the best health retreats in the world. We're both very grateful to have taken part in a 1 week hiatus.
Oof.
Mate, wasn't that a good experience?
It was about almost exactly 4 years ago. I think it was April or May of 2016.
Yeah.
And that was one of the experiences. The Aroha retreat in New Zealand is like one of those experiences I will remember when I'm taking my final breaths on this earth.
Yeah. But and you got to trust the timing of life. And that's where you and I, we met and connected, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And that was actually when I was heading off to Survivor in 2016. I didn't tell anyone about that little hiatus either.
That was, dude, you disappeared. I'm like, where did Sam go? And then like a month later, I saw on Facebook, like the 20 contestants. I'm like, my dude. And it was the first season I ever watched Survivor, man. I was rooting for
yeah, mate, it was awesome. It was awesome. But mate, I appreciate that. And I really do believe that, when you're self-aware, that's when you can start noticing if you are drifting or if you are falling apart. And I think the more that everyone can practice being more self-aware, the better it's going to be for their own life and their partner's life, their family's life, and everyone else. And I couldn't agree more with you when, the old mentality of what is a man, that's out the window now. It's about reaching out and asking for help, admitting when we're wrong, and being open when we need help, and not being scared to admit, that we're not doing something right, and not having to justify and being a problem solver all the time. And I really think that's important. And that leads me on to the next part of this conversation, which is the work that you're doing with men. Is that a big part of that? Or talk to me about what you're doing with men in particular.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the conversation with men. So again, most of the men that I work with are these guys who are fairly accomplished in their work, in their life, but they're feeling disconnected. They're feeling restless about why their life doesn't feel better. maybe even trapped in the life they've created for themselves. And they're wondering, like, I thought that this was what I wanted. So the work that I do with men is helping them to find what gives them their greatest energy so they can align with their purpose. Like, purpose is a big word for a lot of
Very
men. They're
big.
like, right, it's
A big
what's
word for
bigger.
everyone. It's just, what does it mean? Sometimes it's very convoluted, it's very unclear to a lot of people.
Yeah. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to like know what our purpose is and to find out that thing. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions that purpose has to be some magnificent like achievement that they would bronze a statue for you. It doesn't have to be eradicating world hunger or making sure that the next Kardashian spinoff never happens. Like, these are things that need to happen, but like, they don't have to be these big, grandiose things. It could just be like understanding what lights you up. And the way that I talk to people about that is like, those things that give you your greatest energy, right? Like, where you feel a sense of timelessness, effortlessness, right? When you're in flow. And if you were to do that for hours over the course of a day, you wouldn't feel tired, you'd feel lit up. And there are real significant clues around your purpose when you are in that space. The thing that most people do way too early is they take that thing. Maybe it's like, I love dancing, or maybe it's, I love interviewing people on podcasts and like hearing their stories. And people try and take that thing and automatically figure out how they can monetize that, or how they turn that into a career, and they suffocate its potential. I have a friend, his name is Brad, who he and his wife became like, they love being frugal in their spending. Like, they just love figuring out how to take their awards points miles on their credit cards and turn that into like free vacations. 5 years ago, they just started writing articles about that and posted it online. Boom, that caught fire. New York Times, Today Show. They decided to start a website. Boom, it became like a really successful business. Let's start a podcast talking to people about how to create financial independence by being really like smart in their savings. Now, 3 years later, they have 16 million downloads and 300 communities across the world in 300 cities who are learning how to become financially independent. That podcast is called Choose FI. He had no master plan. He just followed his energy because he loved being frugal and saving money and then sharing that with other people. So like, just look for these areas in your life that light you up, where other people seem to gravitate towards you. Spend more time there. Over time, maybe like you'll find out how to monetize it, or maybe it never deserves to be monetized. But that's the place where you are in your best energy. That's where like clues to your purpose reside. And most men that I work with, and this also happens with women too, no doubt. I'm just focusing on men because this is the crux of my work. Most men have been chasing what gives them the most status or the most money, or what like is going to make them a man. And they've never really asked the question, what gives me the most amount of energy?
Is that what you were doing?
So
is that what you were doing in your life back when you were at Prudential?
Yeah. Like what I was training for was the title, financial security with the money, opportunities to have a great, to be wanted by the financial services industry, where I could command, where I could go. That's what I was training for. And I didn't even know I could ask for a life of adventure, a life where I created my own schedule, a life where I get to have conversations like this is my work day now. Are you kidding me? This is amazing. And to speak on stages throughout the world, where I get to help men and women who are looking to unlock the greatest versions of themselves. I have no idea I could ask for that. So when I was working at Prudential the last few years, where I started to really hone in on what my greatest energy was, I found that it was like reading books that no one in the financial services industry was reading, like, spiritual texts or NLP, learning how neuro-linguistic programming, or learning about reading books written for women to understand what women's, like what it would be like to work in a male dominated environment for an entire career. And then I started sharing my wisdom and what I was learning from these books. And I found out that people were like, oh, you're a source of uncommon wisdom. And I love that. Then I started becoming a coach. I just kept following the breadcrumbs. And then eventually I left my corporate career and started this. So it's something that can happen overnight for a select few people that can figure out what their purpose is on a moment's notice. For others like me and like you, like it can evolve over a longer period of time. And take the pressure off yourself to figure out what that is right now. Take the pressure off yourself to monetize it. Just actually become expert in knowing what gives you your greatest energy, because that's like I've never seen anyone go wrong in their life by doing that.
Yeah, very well said, mate. Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. When we talk about males, you know, when we look at job status, making the money, having, you know, problem solving, being the dominant ones, and that leads a lot of people down the path of unfulfillment, unsatisfaction, always wanting more, having not enough, and all these sort of things. And is that what you're sort of unpacking when we're talking about the men's work? Is that a lot?
Yeah.
Is that a lot to do with it?
That's a big part to do with it, is those feelings of like it's never enough, or I'm constantly feeling overwhelmed. I'm constantly doing a million things and I'm never feeling like I'm getting on top of it. What is this all for? You know, those like wake up calls in the middle of the night where you're like, what the hell am I doing with my life? I know I used to have those, and I would be able to drown that out just by being busier the next day, or I would go to one of my vices to knock that out. But eventually it would come back. And this work with men is really around how to connect to the like your purpose and your greatest like energy. The other big part of it is forging bonds with other men in community. Because what I find is most guys have no shortage of drinking buddies. I got mine, you know, like
I
guys you
got
go out
mine.
drinking with, partying. Of course you
Yeah.
do, right? Like who doesn't want to hang out with Sam Webb, man? Like you're a great time. And 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 there's only a certain level of depth that sometimes these hangouts allow for. You know what I mean? And as soon as something gets serious, maybe there's like a bunch of uncomfortable laughter, and then we kind of bounce on to, you know, like the next story about who slept with who.
Yeah.
And right, or whatever the next sporting event is. And I'm all for that. But guys find themselves over the course of their life increasingly isolated. There have been some studies around happiness that have shown across all different like geographies that the unhappiest person in the world is a 45-year-old man. Meaning, like, the reason for this is that, you know, a 45-year-old guy is at the time of his life where thinks his life is probably the busiest, the most amount of work on his shoulders. He may have a family and kids, so there's a lot of responsibility there. He has aging parents, a lot of responsibility there. He's starting to ask questions around like, what's my life for? So there's existential angst, and he's probably not kept up with his friendships in any way, shape, or form, hasn't gone deep with them because of all of his busyness, and also guys haven't trained to do that. So he feels alone. I can't tell you how many guys, Sam, tell me that they go to, like, when their whole family goes to sleep and they're awake at the end of the night, they're surrounded by people, but they couldn't feel more alone, right? So dudes need to find community of other guys where they can let down the armor and connect with one another and be like, bro, I got you. You know, like, what are you struggling with? And also, like, what do you want out of your life? Like, this is not just like one big slop fest. It's not just one big, you know, cry fest, although that happens too, right? When the guards come down, it's also about like, how do we level up? So like the guys that come with me, like these are the dudes who are feeling like, I'm asking bigger questions. I'm asking like these inner questions, and I don't know anyone else around me who's doing that. So I have to seek community. I'm a magnet for those guys, and I'm bringing them together. And this year we're doing a group of 20. But in the future, you know, I'm going to be looking to bring one-day events across the country where we can get other guys who are starting to wake up, who want to meet other guys and create communities, create men's groups in their own communities. I've been a part of a men's group for 2 years. Every Monday night we get together and we work on ourselves for 2.5 hours. So guys, like, a big part of this work with men is coming together with other guys. And I got to tell you, man, women are the biggest supporters of this, because like it's long overdue, and women are the inordinate. They feel the shrapnel from guys when we implode or explode. Like, they feel that inordinately. A lot of the downstream effect hits them.
They're the ones that cop the after effects, really, don't they? So they'd be the ones that would be encouraging, and these things would be a blessing for them, because it's going to nurture relationships. It's going to improve relationships. It's going to make the bonds stronger, more more meaningful and deeper, I guess, on a number of different levels. And I think that's really important. And it's a place that males don't necessarily like to go because of vulnerability and the fear of being judged, and doesn't feel strong enough. It feels weak. And yeah, it's a very large topic, mate. I'm glad that you're doing some really good work on that. And I'm excited to see where that heads for you, and, the milestones that you achieve over this next part, or this next chapter in your life. I think it's really exciting for you, mate. I think you're doing great work, and yeah, I'm very grateful to have met you and, learn from you. And yeah, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, brother, I love you, man, and what you stand for. And one of the amazing things about you is that, like, you have made talking about mental health and mental well-being cool, right? And like, you're a guy's guy, right? Like, you go out, like, you're fit, you're athletic, you can drink, like, you can party, you take adventures, you're on Survivor, and also you can go deep. And I believe that is the kind of man the world is calling for. When I say the depth is what the world is calling for, a man with depth. And you could be a man with depth that doesn't have an athletic bone in his body, but you could be a great singer. You could be a man who's not competitive at all, but, like, you're wonderful at being there for someone who's not feeling very well in the moment. Like, what the world is calling for is a man who knows who he is, who can go deep, who can go wide. And we have to work on that because we haven't trained for it. So I offer, if any of this is resonating, and, someone who's listening is looking for more resources and tools, Sam, we've got this website called doinnerwork.com. And at doinnerwork.com, we have this resources tab where I've got a bunch of book lists, like, here are the best books, 12 books every man must read, and 18 books every business leader, like, should read. I've got meditations on there, guided meditations for you to start, like, envisioning your future. How to become a mentally tougher, like 5 ways to become a mentally tougher man. These are all resources that we make available for free download at doinnerwork.com, so that you can get on your path. And we'd love to have you join us on our podcast too, which is called The Great Man Within, where we talk about this stuff in much greater detail.
I'd be honored to be on it, man. I would be. And
you're going to be.
Let's set it up. Let's lock it in. Let's make it happen. And thank you very much for all the work that you're doing, all the resources that you've mentioned. We will put everything in the show notes for this episode. Also, they will be shared amongst the Facebook community once this episode hits live. That being said, where can they find you, Dom? Where can our listeners find you to learn more about what you're up to?
Dude, I would say the first place to go is just come over to the podcast, The Great Man Within podcast. Half of our listeners are women because they're so interested in hearing some of these conversations that we have about sexuality. Dude, it's crazy, awesome, man. And the reason why we're experiencing growth is because women are just pointing men. They're just like, you got to come listen to this. And women are fantastic with that. We talk about sexuality, purpose, optimal performance in your life. So The Great Man Within podcast, and then doinnerwork.com, where the resources are there that highly encourage you to download. We sometimes have people go to the site and they just, like, download all 15 or 16, whatever we have on there right now, just boom, because it's, like, so useful. So to those 2 places.
Yeah, cool, mate. Thank you very much for sharing. And one quick question I do like asking most of my guests is, obviously this show's built, the name of it is It Ain't Weak to Speak. What's your interpretation of that? Very, very quickly in your expertise, in your area of expertise, and the work that you do in your life currently, what is your interpretation of that? There's no right or wrong answer, man. I love to find everyone's insight, and I think you've shared so much wisdom with myself and our audience today, and I'm excited to hear your interpretation of that very good mantra, It Ain't Weak to Speak.
I've always loved it. I wear all of your gear. And for me, it's always meant, like, here is this safe space where you can speak up about however it is you're feeling, and it'll be welcome. And it's not only is it not weak, it's strength. I truly believe that. So for me, here's the safe space where you can speak up. And when you do, I perceive that as strength.
Love it, man. Love it. Absolutely love it, brother. And I've loved having you on the show today. Very grateful for your time, as always. I know you're a very busy man. So I'm going to let you go. We've definitely got some great content down today. I can't wait to share this with our listeners. But in the meantime, Dom, stay well, keep living, my brother, and remember, it ain't weak to speak. Thanks, bro.